My name is Pax Haymeyer. I am the Director of Programs at the Stanford Center for Professional Development. It's my pleasure to host all of you in our webinar today on cybersecurity and COVID-19. And it is my honor to host Dr. Neil Daswani, who is the co-director of the Stanford Advanced Computer Security Certificate Program. Security research and development is in Neil's DNA. He has a PhD in computer science from Stanford, and he has numerous published technical articles, top journals, as well as U.S. patents. He is also the co-author of Foundations of Security, What Every Programmer Needs to Know. And I'll say, as someone who doesn't have a strong technical background, that book is also very interesting, even for non-programmers. At a conceptual level, I think it's very valuable to give an overview of considerations around computer security. In addition to Neil's research and teaching, he has been a security entrepreneur. He co-founded Daswani, which was acquired by Twitter, and he has also served in numerous executive positions at top companies, including as Chief Information Security Officer at LifeLock and at Symantec's Consumer Business Unit. So I can think of no one better to present on this topic, which is on the sort of current cybersecurity landscape in consideration of some recent data breaches, major mega breaches, as well as COVID-19. So with that, I am going to hand the presentation off to Neil.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Pax. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you all for joining. I was glad to see just over 600 of you joining on for today's session. What I'm going to do in today's session is I'm going to provide an introduction to the area of cybersecurity. For those that perhaps are not super familiar with cybersecurity, I'm going to cover, for those of you that are familiar with cybersecurity, some interesting trends. And I'm going to then spend the second half of the time focusing on how COVID-19 and coronavirus has impacted the work that we do in information security. So look forward to covering both of those. What I'll be doing is, after reviewing some basic breach statistics and root causes, I'm going to talk about just 3 recent breaches from the past 3 years. I'm then going to talk about COVID-19 impacts to information security, including a few different areas of importance, and I'm going to bring everything together. And before I begin and really get into things, I just wanted to tell everybody that I hope that you're doing everything you can to continue to be safe and healthy for both yourself and your families in this time. It is a pretty interesting time in the history of the world. Going into data breaches, if we just look at what's been going on over the past 15 years, there has been a stepwise increase in the number of breaches that have been reported over the years. And prior to 2009, most of the reported breaches were due to organized cyber criminals. In 2009, after the Aurora attack that occurred against Google and about 3,000 other companies, there has been an increase in the number of reported breaches. And one hypothesis is that increase has been due to nation-state attacks. Now, I would also want to comment on this particular slide that this slide shows the number of reported breaches from the privacyrights.org database. They aggregate their data from state attorney generals that have to be notified when organizations identify that there's been a breach. At the same time, there's a whole bunch of breaches that are not reported. So if you look at companies that monitor the dark web for a living and that look at username and password dumps that are reported there, they will report that there's been more breaches than what's reported here. If you look over the past 15 years, there's been about 9,000 or so reported breaches, but there's been many more unreported breaches. If we look at not just the number of breaches, but we look at the number of records that are being exposed or stolen due to these breaches, there has been a super linear increase. We can see that when the mega breaches started happening in 2013 and afterwards, there's been a pretty significant increase there. I tried a whole bunch of different fits for this curve, both polynomial and exponential. None of them fit particularly well, but it's pretty clear that the increase is super linear. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that just based on the data from the previous slide here on the number of reported breaches, if anyone attempts to claim that there's been an exponential increase in the number of breaches, well, that doesn't quite fit this data. As someone who's a scientist by background, I think it's really important to be clear about what the increases are. There has been a super linear increase in the number of records that have been getting breached. And so what one hypothesis there is that once attackers are able to get into an organization, they've been getting better at getting more and more data out of organizations. Now, if we look at the number of unreported breaches, that may tell another part of the story, but we'll leave that for another time. So there have been a whole bunch of mega breaches that have taken place, and when I say mega breaches, I mean more than 10 million records or so. And in our Foundations of Security course that we have here at Stanford Online, we do comment on a number of these mega breaches going up through 2016 and 2017. In this webinar, I thought it might be fun to just cover a few of the mega breaches from the past 3 years, namely the Equifax breach, the Marriott breach, and the Capital One breach. And we'll go into the details of those. And then once we cover that, then I'll go into talking about what's been going on in the current landscape given coronavirus and the various sheltered home orders and how that's been impacting the field. So there has been a pretty significant increase in the number of breaches over time. Why have these breaches been happening? It turns out there's really just a few root causes. One of the root causes is unencrypted data. So if you look at a bunch of different breaches that occur due to portable devices getting lost or stolen, or physical losses of paper data or just hard drives, if any of the data on those physical devices is lost and not encrypted, then it's a reportable breach in which an organization has to tell the state attorney general about it. However, if you encrypt all the data, then it doesn't matter if the hard drive gets stolen, or it doesn't matter if the mobile device gets stolen. There is no breach because the attackers just get gibberish. Now, the assumption there is that the encryption keys also don't get stolen and whatnot, but that is, for example, one root cause. There's been many breaches that have occurred due to various forms of quote-unquote hacking, in which phishing attacks as well as malware attacks occur. I assume everyone's seen phishing emails and everyone's familiar with malware, both in the form of attachments that sometimes come in emails, but also these days you can get infected just by clicking a link and loading a web page through malware drive-by downloads. And those tools have been used by attackers in many, many different hacks. I've listed just some of them here. There's also been a number of hacks and breaches due to third-party compromise or abuse, whether those third parties are suppliers, partners, application developers, and we don't have time to go into all of these, but that's one source of root cause of breaches. The other two that I'll mention are software security. So whenever there's software vulnerabilities, both first-party software vulnerabilities as well as third-party software vulnerabilities, vulnerabilities in software that a company makes itself or in software that a company uses, that can lead to breaches. In fact, we'll cover the Equifax breach, and that was a significant root cause there. And then finally, a lot of breaches happen due to just inadvertent employee errors and accidents, separate from phishing. Phishing is a type of employee error that is responsible for just so many breaches that's been split out. But in any case, these are the kind of core reasons why these are happening. So if you are a CISO or you're an aspiring CISO, if you're a chief information security officer or aspire to be one, first thing you should do, go into an organization, make sure you encrypt all the data, and then focus on these root causes. There may be many, many compliance standards that you have to satisfy, whether it be PCI, whether it be HIPAA, whether it be ISO 27000, you have a lot of different boxes to check, but if you focus on these root causes, you'll dramatically reduce the possibility of a breach. So let me talk about some breaches. And let me start with the Equifax breach in 2017. This was probably the largest breach of financial identity information that has ever happened. Over 148 million names, social security numbers, dates of birth, pretty much exactly the information that an attacker will want to use to file for a loan or credit pretty much got stolen. It got stolen by a set of Chinese hackers that are suspected to be working on behalf of the People's Republic of China. And through this breach, they acquired identity information on approximately half of the consumers in the United States. How did something like that happen? Well, if you look at any articles about the Equifax breach, you'll see that the vulnerability that this was kind of mostly blamed on was a vulnerability in a piece of middleware called Apache Struts that makes it easier to write web applications. That particular vulnerability has been added to the National Vulnerability Database. The identifier for that vulnerability is CVE 2017-5638. But that vulnerability was responsible only for the initial compromise. And I'll walk through a timeline of how the breach happened. But one thing to keep in mind is that there's a lot of software vulnerabilities out there. This particular one did happen to be particularly dangerous. It was the 5,638th vulnerability just in 2017. And every year there's, sometimes 10,000 or more of these types of vulnerabilities. So making sure that if you use third-party software that you patch it is really important. But what one sees is if you look at the Equifax breach more generally, you'll see that there were a number of security failures, not just one patch server that was responsible for the entire breach. There was a general set of systems that were not being maintained, whether it be patching or otherwise. Once the attackers got in to Equifax using the initial vulnerability, the attackers were able to move around within Equifax because there was a lack of network segmentation. Ideally, you want network segmentation so that if one part of your network is compromised, the attackers can't just get into other parts of the network. There was also a lack of file integrity monitoring, which would have alerted them to files getting dropped and malware getting installed. The attackers were able to get access to database credentials while the databases did have passwords. Those passwords were stored in configuration files that the attackers were able to access. So that's a little bit about how it happened. I'll go with a little bit more detailed timeline. How could it have been prevented? Well, it could have been prevented not just by patching this one particular Apache Struts vulnerability, but the fact that this issue occurred, the fact that this breach occurred, was a sign that there was not a more generally rigorous vulnerability management program in which vulnerabilities could not only just be identified and staff could be emailed reminding them to patch, but you really need to track who's responsible for the patching. Typically with a ticketing system, you need to make sure that when someone claims that they patched a vulnerability, that actually does get so. When you have an infrastructure of hundreds of thousands or more machines, inevitably some machines not going to get patched. And so you need processes that also technically verify that a patch took place. It's not just about scanning. So looking at the Equifax breach in a little bit more detail and looking at how the initial compromise occurred, the compromise occurred on an application that Equifax used to allow people to dispute information on their credit files, and it happened to be using Apache Struts. And the way that the attackers got into Equifax's server was by issuing a malicious request to that web server. A normal request, for those of you that know, when you have a web browser, it connects to a web server. It connects to that web server first by domain name and then gets the appropriate translation to IP address. And once the computers have a connection, the browser will send over a request saying, hey, get the home page, something like this normal request here. Get index.html, and it presents the protocol version that helps the server interpret the request. And there's a whole bunch of other information, but that's kind of the gist of it. Now, the particular vulnerability that existed in the Apache Struts server at Equifax was one in which if the attacker sent a little bit more information, in particular this content type header, which, by the way, usually isn't used with a GET request. But if they sent over this additional header with some information in it, in particular a command, the server would actually execute that command. So in general, this is a very, very bad thing when a unauthenticated, unauthorized party can send over some data that gets interpreted and run as a command on a server. It pretty much lets the attacker do almost anything that they want on the server. And in this particular case, what the attacker told the server to do was to write some data or to go into a shared memory directory, to download a file from a Chinese server whose IP address ended in .92 at port 92, download this file called LMYDESS, save that file to the shared memory. And by the way, the attacker did that so that nothing would get written to disk, so that if there were any antivirus or if there was any intrusion detection system that were monitoring the disk, it wouldn't cause any kind of issues there. It just stored this command in memory. It changed the permissions on that file so that one could run it, and then it attempted to run it. And so if we look at the timeline for the Equifax attack, the vulnerability that was used, this Apache Struts vulnerability, was announced to the world on March the 7th, together with a patch. At Equifax, the information about the vulnerability was disseminated to about 400 employees, and they were told patch within 48 hours if you're running Apache Struts. The vulnerability was published to the National Vulnerability Database on March the 10th, and also on March the 10th, Chinese attackers started probing Equifax's servers using the kind of commands that I showed on this slide here with the malicious probe request. Now, there's a lot of information on this timeline, and so I've just focused on the first part of it here. But after these probes were done, really nothing happened for a few months. In fact, shortly after the probes, the Equifax Global Threat and Vulnerability Management team conducted a bunch of vulnerability scans using a McAfee vulnerability scanner. Now, when they were doing those vulnerability scans to see if they were still vulnerable, supposedly after the folks patched the vulnerability scans all came back negative. They said there was no vulnerability. Unfortunately, what happened was that the scanner or their scanning process had a false negative, in that even though the vulnerability was still there in a number of subdirectories on various servers, only the root directories were getting scanned. So the Equifax security team may have thought, oh, yeah, we're not vulnerable. So if they could have done this better, they could have scanned before or at the same time that they sent out all these emails saying, please patch, please patch, and then scanned afterwards. But there was just a scan that took place afterwards which said there was no vulnerability. Later on, actually 2 months later on, after the probes were sent out, Chinese attackers actually used the vulnerability and planted a web shell on one of the Apache Struts servers. In fact, after that succeeded, the attackers then went on to place 30 different web shells and leverage more vulnerabilities than just the Apache Struts vulnerabilities. There were SQL injection vulnerabilities. The attackers installed a Java server page that gave them another web shell, etc. But fast forward a couple months later, nobody had noticed. One of the reasons that the vulnerability and the exploitation of it didn't get noticed is because while Equifax did have an intrusion detection system that was running, that intrusion detection system did not have an updated security certificate which allowed it to do its job. That security certificate was out of date for 19 months. Once somebody at Equifax had renewed that certificate, then the system was able to see the suspicious network traffic. The security team attempted to block it, but the next day, more suspicious traffic was still identified, and at that point, the CIO was briefed. A day later, the CEO was briefed. A few days later, a forensics firm, a very well-known forensics firm by the name of Marriott, was hired to conduct forensics. The FBI was informed of the breach, and you see how things went from there. So, if you read the congressional report about what happened in the breach, the CEO of Equifax pretty much said, "Oh, somebody forgot to act on an email that they were forwarded and patch a server." Well, the reality is that the situation was actually much more complicated. It's not just that someone didn't act on an email, but there wasn't a more rigorous vulnerability management process in place. There were security devices and appliances that were not being maintained and updated in a rigorous, timely fashion. And arguably, if all that was happening, then this could have gotten detected well before 30 web shells got installed at Equifax. And it was identified that tons of data was exfiltrated. So in any case, you could see the path of events. After the forensics folks go in, senior leadership is briefed, Equifax's board of directors is briefed, and they announce the breach publicly in September via press release. There were so many people that were impacted by this breach, there just wasn't even enough time to send out letters or emails to all of them right away. It was announced via press release. And what Equifax did was they set up a website. I'll talk about the breach response in just a second. But one thing that happened even after that is they identified that it wasn't just 143 million records or so that were stolen. Through additional forensics, it was discovered that there were more records breached, and Equifax had to keep updating that number. In mid-August, they had, as part of their breach response, started an internal project by the name of Project Sparta that was intended to provide a service to consumers to help them, first of all, know whether or not they were breached and provide them credit monitoring, identity theft insurance. Given that Equifax was a credit reporting agency, folks at Equifax thought, hey, we could help consumers out. Unfortunately, there were a couple problems with that response. So firstly, Equifax was mostly a B2B company and wasn't used to helping large numbers of consumers. When they launched their response site, the team that was responsible for putting up the site wasn't even told that there was a breach at Equifax. They thought they were doing it for some other customer. And they were also told to launch it not on Equifax.com, but on another site called EquifaxSecurity2017.com. And one can imagine that one can ask, well, why should you trust that domain as opposed to being able to go to Equifax.com directly? In fact, a security researcher had set up a website called SecurityEquifax2017.com. And what had happened is there was so much confusion around the breach response that at Equifax, the company itself, for the folks that were managing the Twitter account, they were telling people to go to the wrong site, to go to SecurityEquifax2017.com for assistance, when the real site was EquifaxSecurity2017.com. The security researcher had set up a site at SecurityEquifax2017.com telling people that, hey, if you entered your information on this site, you could have just gotten phished and duped. So please tell Equifax to respond in a better way. So quite a few challenges. So the Equifax breach was super interesting, big financial identity breach. I'll talk just a little bit about the Marriott breach from 2018, as opposed to the Equifax breach, where an initial number of records stolen was announced, and then that number kept going up. Marriott had first told the world, when they identified that they were breached in 2018, that up to 500 million accounts could have been compromised, and then they started ratcheting that number down as they did those forensics. That I think was one of the only things that was kind of done right. The reason that the breach occurred at Marriott is because they acquired Starwood. And while Marriott had acquired quite a few hotel companies before, Marriott's, of course, one of the largest hotel companies in the world. They had made acquisitions on the order of a few $100 million here and there, but Starwood was a $13 billion acquisition, a huge acquisition, a transformative acquisition. And the due diligence around the acquisition arguably could have been done better. In fact, in 2015, shortly after the acquisition was announced, just 5 days afterwards, there was a malware incident that occurred at Starwood. And there were actually a number of malware incidents that occurred not only at Starwood, but also at Marriott in June 2017. A malware researcher at the company had their webmail compromised. In July 2017, just a month later, it was identified that there was malware running on 6 Starwood servers. And so there was a whole history here of poor patching, poor maintenance of servers, and malware incidents. And what had happened in 2018 was that one of the systems that was being used for security monitoring, IBM Guardian, had detected that there was a query that was made against their reservations database for the total number of rows in the kind of key database table. And now that wasn't a query for the information itself or for the records itself. Rather, it was a query just for the number of rows. But that query was a tip that they had been compromised because of the fact that none of their automated systems or programs were programmed to run that query. So there was a human running the query, and it was running using the database administrator's credentials. And when the security team at Marriott kind of dug in and asked that particular administrator, hey, did you run this query that just asked for the number of rows? And the DBA, the database administrator, said no. It was pretty clear that there had been a breach. So an investigation team started looking into things. They discovered that not only was it the case that that query was not issued by the DBA and that it was issued by an attacker, they also discovered more malware. They discovered that a remote access Trojan had been installed. And a few more weeks after that, it was identified that there was Mimikatz malware running. Mimikatz malware typically is used to capture additional privileges, escalate, laterally move within organizations once an initial compromise has taken place. And it was also identified that the breach had actually been undetected for 4 years. They had Starwood had gotten breached in 2014. Just nobody knew. And in fact, when the acquisition was taking place, the fact that Starwood had been breached was not identified during their due diligence. So it's important, of course, if you're acquiring a company, to realize that prior to the acquisition, the company that you're acquiring is a third party, but after the acquisition, they become a first party. You're all part of the same company. So if you acquire a company that's been breached, you're breached too. In any case, that's a little bit about the Marriott breach. The next breach that I'll talk about is the Capital One breach. And this happened in 2019. What got stolen? This was also a very significant financially identity-related breach. It had occurred because of vulnerabilities in a hybrid cloud deployment of Capital One's. And actually, maybe what I could do is just kind of technically walk through how the breach happened. But it's a pretty significant breach, over 100 million SSNs and records stolen. Capital One estimated breach cost of over 300 million. It was due to a firewall misconfiguration in how they were using Amazon Web Services, and due to a server-side request forgery SSRF vulnerability in one of their EC2 instances, one of their virtual machines running on Amazon. Let me talk about how it happened, and then come back to how it could be prevented. So the Capital One breach occurred, and I'll just kind of fly through the diagram here because I want to get to the COVID-related content here. what happened is that the attacker identified that there was what's called a server-side request forgery vulnerability, and we of course cover these vulnerabilities in more detail in our courses. Basically, an attacker was able to leverage this machine to relay requests onto other pieces of software. In particular, for those of you that are familiar with AWS, they had a web application that was able to be exploited to relay requests to Amazon's metadata service. So once the attacker identified that this vulnerability existed, they sent a request saying, hey, what security credentials does this virtual machine have? And because of the SSRF vulnerability, that request was passed on to an internal metadata service that one could typically not access directly, but one could access because of this vulnerable machine. And effectively, it said, hey, I have this WAF web role security credential. So the attacker, who was codenamed Erratic, it was actually a former Amazon employee, said, okay, well, let me, actually just give me the credentials. And, if the attacker directly tried to ask the metadata service, it wouldn't have worked. But because of this server-side request forgery vulnerability, where the vulnerable machine would relay the request, the metadata service saw the request coming from a bona fide process and program that should be able to access those credentials. So the metadata service responded to that service, and that information was relayed onto the attacker. The attacker said, wow, I have the security credentials now, so why don't I start up my AWS command line interface, input the credentials in there, and was then able to ask, okay, well, what can I access in Amazon's data storage, in Capital One's Amazon data storage, using those credentials? And what came back was a list of 700 data stores, so-called S3 buckets in Amazon parlance. And the Amazon S3 buckets have given that the attacker had the actual credentials at this point, there was no way for them to distinguish the two. So pretty much when the attacker said, well, just give me all the data in all the buckets, the 100 million credit card applications in those data stores came over. That's how the Capital One breach happened. How could this have been prevented? It could have been prevented through more detailed and better firewall review. It could have been prevented by identifying the SSRF vulnerability. It could have been prevented by having more limited privileges so that these buckets were not available to this web application firewall web role. In the field of security, we have a technique called principle of least privilege, where you only give access to only those things that are needed. In any case, let me now switch gears to talking about how coronavirus has impacted the world of information security, and then I'll relate it to all these breaches that have been taking place. So the key big change that has occurred due to coronavirus is that many companies have had to have their employees work from home almost immediately, very short order, very little heads up to information security teams. And in a traditional model where you have a VPN and you have an intranet, and people are expected to come into a building and have their laptops authenticate to a wireless access point, this is a very jarring change. And I'll chat about a security model that can support remote workforce a heck of a lot better, called Zero Trust Architecture. Google's implementation of it's called BeyondCorp. I'll also chat a little bit about some of the pros and cons of using on-premise architectures versus using cloud in this current situation. Given that employees have had to work from home, there's been some challenges, security challenges with them using home routers. And there's been a ramp up in the number of phishing and social engineering attacks that have been leveraging the situation for bad purposes here. Finally, a lot of people have been switching to using video teleconferencing, using platforms like Zoom, And there's been a whole bunch of threats that have occurred due to that. So let me dig into each of these. First, let me talk about what zero trust architecture is about. So as I mentioned, in a traditional corporate model, you have an intranet, you have a trusted network, and what you can do internally kind of depends on where you are on the network. If you're on the intranet, in a traditional architecture, it gives you all kinds of special privileges to access not only an intranet website, perhaps a whole bunch of internal applications, whether they be HR applications, finance applications, code repositories if you're an engineer. And after the Aurora attack happened in 2009 against Google and 3 dozen other companies, Google, as well as a bunch of other folks, said, okay, look, maybe that model is just the wrong model. Instead, what if you had a model where we don't have a perimeter, where we don't have somebody authenticating, and then once they're in, they're able to access all the stuff inside? Rather, the model says, you know what, assume that even the inside is compromised. If you have any significant numbers of employees, hundreds or thousands of employees, then one of them is likely to be compromised or more, and they're going to be on the inside. So just because somebody's on the inside of your network, don't assume that they are a good actor. Rather, have a model where there is no perimeter. The perimeter is gone, and when you are on a network, you still have to, I mean, just because you're on a network, it doesn't give you any special privileges. You have to always present your credentials, you have to present your 2FA, you have to provide some certificates from your device for every system that you log into. And so in fact, what Google does in their implementation of Zero Trust, which is called BeyondCorp, is that all of their internal services are actually on the full internet. There are DNS entries for everything on their network. And every user, whether you're coming in from the straight internet or whether you are coming in from a wireless network in a Google building, is authenticated. So if we think about what's happened in a post-coronavirus world where everybody has been, or a lot of people have been forced to work remotely in a very distributed way, if you were already operating in this kind of perimeterless model, you don't need a VPN. And people can come in from their homes, modulo some home router potential vulnerabilities, but you can come into any of the internal services. And so what the lesson here is that if you have been along the path of implementing a zero trust model, it may be a good time to continue and or accelerate that, because you'll be able to just serve the workforce better. If, however, you don't operate in a zero trust model and you have a VPN, I mean, you're going to need external, more VPN server capacity. This also has some relation to using cloud services. If you use on-premise data centers, whether it be for your corporate network and services and or your production applications, you have to worry about the staff, and you have to make sure that they are abiding by social distancing requirements and potentially wearing masks and just being safe. The more that you leverage cloud services, the more that you leverage software as a service, the less you have to worry about that. Now, the cloud providers still need to worry about that, but in theory, they can kind of scale up on demand. And so previously, it used to be the case that companies planned that, well, maybe 5%, 10%, 15% of our workforce is remote. Now, what happens when 95% of your workforce is remote? Well, if you're in a traditional model, you need to scale up on that VPN server capacity really fast. And because you're used to kind of trusting folks within a perimeter, you have a lot more things to think about. But if you move to a perimeterless model where you, in fact, phase out the VPN over time, you're then used to 95% of your workforce coming in from the straight internet, and you give them trusted devices. You have them authenticate via a single sign-on system. You have them coming in via two-factor, et cetera, with all of the, say, SaaS services that they used. Now, given that we are where we're at, there are some organizations that, with their operations staff also now connecting in remotely, may be a little bit wary of making significant changes to their production systems while everyone's working remotely. That said, I would still recommend trying to accelerate a move to a zero trust model, accelerating a move to leveraging SaaS services where you have the cloud providers, managing scalability, managing security, managing a whole bunch of things. That may work out for the long term. Let's chat a little bit about some other COVID-related impacts. So typically when employees would walk into a building and their router effectively was the company's wireless router, the security of that router was managed by corporate IT. Well, in today's situation where you have a large remote workforce, that's not the case. People are coming in from their home routers. Now, how many people maintain their home router as well as corporate IT manages their wireless routers, for instance? It's typically not as well managed. And the kind of key threat is that whenever you come in from a router, what that router is using for the domain name service. So anytime that you enter a URL in a web browser or a domain in a web browser, whether it be google.com or the domain for your company's production website or your company's corporate network, effectively, if an attacker can change that translation of that domain name to IP address, the attacker can then provide whatever IP address they want. And from that point, pretty much control wherever you're trying to go on the internet and feed you fake sites, fake resources, fake whatever. So there are many other, home security router threats, but the management of DNS is super important. DNS reconfiguration, DNS cache poisoning. How do attackers effectively do those kinds of DNS hacks? And I'll give an example in just a second. If there are default passwords, attackers can try a whole bunch of the default passwords. So if you got your home router and you never change the password, that could be game over because attackers know exactly what things to try. In fact, back in 2016, there was a significant attack called Mirai botnet that was able to infect hundreds of thousands of routers and webcams and all kinds of things, and actually take down Twitter and Spotify and a whole bunch of very, very big sites, using those compromised machines. Also, making sure that you continuously patch your router is important if there's security vulnerabilities that they may need to be updated against. Unfortunately, there also might be some routers that are simply not patchable. So in any case, the security of the home router becomes super important. Make sure you're not using a default password. Make sure you're using a strong password, not one that can be easily guessed. Update your router firmware if necessary. Enable the firewall or increase its sensitivity in this current environment. Check the DNS settings. If you're technical enough, go into the tab that says DNS and see, well, which DNS server is it being used? Is it the one from your internet service provider, for instance? If not, your web browsing may be getting poisoned. You can also consider using your company's DNS server if they allow that, or use one provided by Google or OpenDNS, Cloudflare. There are many secure such options. One example of such an attack against home routers was against the Linksys Smart Wi-Fi router just recently. Basically, it's suspected that there were about 1,200 such routers that were taken over by just brute forcing the passwords. What that means is that the attackers would try every combination. And because computers can try combinations really fast, they were able to take over 1,200 such routers. The attackers did exactly what I just talked about. They changed the domain name service settings, and they redirected accesses to legitimate domains to domains that were malware laden, including various fake coronavirus pages. So this picture up here to the top right is a screen that would come up once the router had been taken over, telling people that they should download from this site to get the latest information about coronavirus, and the information was purported to be coming from the World Health Organization. Of course, it was not. Once somebody clicked the download button, they would get what's called OSCI malware, and it would pretty much just take over their network. There were a number of countries that were targeted, mostly U.S. and Germany in this, but this is a concrete example of the threat against home routers that I just talked about. The next thing I want to chat about here on coronavirus is that video teleconferencing has become much, much, much more important. And there's many different video teleconferencing platforms. I don't think there's any video teleconferencing platform that is perfect, but Zoom happens to be one video teleconferencing platform that has just been very usable. It was engineered to just be extremely easy to use and extremely easy to adopt. So unfortunately, though, Zoom had not invested as much into their security and privacy. So that has resulted in a whole bunch of bad things happening, right? So there are various online classrooms, given that a lot of schools are now using distance learning. There's a lot of online classrooms that got taken over. And that effectively was problematic to the point that the FBI put out warnings. There are government meetings that have gotten taken over because they were being run on Zoom. So there was a U.S. House Oversight Committee that got interrupted 3 times by uninvited attendees. And, the attackers are doing what's called Zoom bombing, where they get on to a Zoom conference uninvited, and they are sometimes not only just disruptive, but they start posting pornographic messages. They start throwing out racial slurs. There's all kinds of badness that occurs. Zoom as a company pretty much had, made some security claims and some privacy claims. They, for instance, claimed that they used end-to-end encryption, but some of these claims haven't been exactly panning out. It's been significant enough that there's been at least one senator that has requested that the Federal Trade Commission investigate Zoom and the claims that they've been making. Various governments have come out and said that, India has said that Zoom's not a safe platform. Zoom's been banned by the UK Ministry of Defense, as well as a whole bunch of companies that typically are used to dealing with nation-state actors, nation-state threats. So that's the bad news. The good news is that Zoom CEO pretty much said, okay, look, for the next 90 days, we are not going to work on anything at the company except privacy and security. There's going to be no new features that are going to go into Zoom. They're just going to focus on fixing the privacy and security issues. I would encourage everybody that if you're using Zoom, please install the updates, because with each update, they are fixing a whole bunch of stuff as fast as they can. There are many security bugs, but usually they're easy to fix. There are some bugs that relate to how they're using various cryptographic libraries for encryptions and stuff. Those will take a little bit more time to get fixed because of the fact that every participant in a Zoom conference needs to be using the updated client in order to benefit from any fixes to their encryption. Zoom has also created a security advisory board. They are working with security experts like Stanford's own Alex Stamos, as well as Leah Kistner, who's ex-Google and served as a chief privacy officer. So they are engaging with the right types of folks to help them. To just give some examples of some of the issues and some specific resolutions. So I'd mentioned Zoom bombing, joining a meeting uninvited. Shortly after this started happening, pretty much, I saw a update to my Zoom client that I was using. I think on this particular webinar we're using On24, but for other meetings I've been using Zoom, and basically with one of the updates they enabled a whole bunch of defaults that do the right security settings. So all meetings effectively became password protected. If you're not joining in via a link, you have to not only enter the meeting number, but you have to enter a password. And that's because there were a whole bunch of attackers that were effectively, quote unquote, war dialing meeting numbers. They were trying like a whole bunch of different combinations of meeting IDs and just seeing which meetings that they could get into. For those of you that have ever seen, Matthew Broderick's War Games movie, it's the equivalent of effectively trying every phone number. You try a whole bunch of things, you'll get some phone numbers that there's computers at the end of. In the case of Zoom, you try a whole bunch of different of these 9-digit or so numbers, and you'll end up getting into somebody's meeting. But they have now enabled secure default so that meetings are password protected. In addition, for the host organizers, they are telling the host organizers that waiting rooms, and they've enabled a feature whereby waiting rooms are automatically enabled, so that for anybody that joins, they don't join the meeting right away, but they're thrown into a virtual waiting room, and the host of the meeting has to explicitly approve and admit each person that wants to join. So that's a great default. There's been a bunch of other security vulnerabilities. So one of them is that in Zoom's iOS app, in their Apple app, they were using a Facebook SDK library where if you join a meeting, then whether or not you're a Facebook user, some of your data would get sent to Facebook. Your information about your device, information about your location, and they didn't explicitly declare that would take place in their privacy policy. So they removed that Facebook SDK from their iOS app, and so as you can see, there's a bunch of problems here, but most, if not all of them, are fixable, and usually fixable pretty fast. One fun security issue that occurred is that Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the UK, had to have his, and I think he got hospitalized for coronavirus concerns at some point. But in any case, he was running one of his cabinet meetings virtually via Zoom, and I think he wanted to just tweet out to the country saying, hey, we are having continuity of government, things are moving forward, and he included in his tweet a screenshot of his Zoom meeting. Now, unfortunately, the previous default was that the IDs for Zoom meetings would be put into the title bar, and especially without some of the other secure default protections that I talked about, if you simply know a Zoom meeting ID, you'd be able to join. So Zoom has taken meeting IDs out of the title bar. In any case, these are some examples. There's been a whole bunch of other issues. Various reports, one from Citizen Lab, has identified that the encryption that they're using is not sufficient. They were using AES, Advanced Encryption Standard Encryption, in ECB mode, encrypted cipher block mode, or encoded cipher block mode, basically encrypting 128 bits at a time or whatever. But basically, you could see that encryption's using that mode. Like if you're trying to encrypt this image of a penguin, you can pretty much make out that it's a penguin, even with that encryption mode. So they have to improve their encryption, as I mentioned. They are also, having encryption keys go to some servers in China, which is particularly concerning. While many of their key servers are in the U.S., there were 5 of them that were in China. There's got to be more improvements, but as I said, a lot of things are fixable in short order. So they should just simply not use servers in China. There's additional issues. I'm not going to go through all of them. I want to get to at least a question or two. Some top recommendations, though, like I said, install all patches. And here's a list of various Zoom security features that you should enable. You should disable join before host, so that if you're the host, nobody else can join before you. You should only enable people that are authenticated. You should require the meeting passwords, which again is now the default. Some of these are default settings, some of these are not. But here is a list of top things for you to implement in your Zoom meetings so that they can be more secure. I would, by the way, mention that when it's not only important for you to update your client, but make sure that all participants update their clients as well. So before your next Zoom meeting, send an email out to everybody, tell them, hey, please update your client, and that way you can all benefit from the best encryption and whatnot that any changes that they make, because all participants would have to use that. Otherwise, it's going to be backward compatible with the oldest client in order for things to work. So the final thing I'll comment on is the number of suspicious domains on the internet that are coronavirus related has been on the rise. This data comes from Checkpoint Research. You see that up until March, the number of domains were going up. There have been a whole bunch of phishing attacks. A bunch of ways to deal with phishing attacks is very similar to phishing attacks in general. Attackers will leverage the trend of the day to do their bidding. Coronavirus is no exception to that. You should not only make sure that the sender really is the World Health Organization or it really is the CDC, but specific to COVID-19, watch out for any offers for stimulus. The attackers are taking advantage of, people's desperation and need for stimulus. So, there's this saying that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Watch out for impersonation of government agencies, fake coronavirus websites. If you're in an IT organization, I would recommend using a blacklist like this one from the Cyber Threat Coalition, where they just send out data about what are all the bad coronavirus-related sites so that you can defend your systems and your user populations against it. Here are some examples of actual phishing attacks that are COVID-related. Clicking on this link, of course, does not give you a FAQ about COVID-19. It'll infect your machine. Some of these are made to look, pretty legitimate. This is a update for companies that have some operations in China as to what the issues are. Of course, this attachment here is not a legitimate bona fide attachment. It's a piece of malware. There's emails going around with fake coronavirus maps. The second that you get the email with the map, you click on this link, it'll infect your machine. So be careful about that. In any case, the summary here is that if you've ever heard the term assume breach, assume you're breached and move forward based on that. That couldn't be more true in today's environment. Assume that your corporate network will inevitably get compromised. Move to a zero trust model as fast as you can. The most prominent attack techniques, phishing, malware, social engineering, are still used even more so in this kind of post-coronavirus world. And so when you're also using cloud services and SaaS, keep in mind that whenever you have that hybrid environment, there's all kinds of chances for issues and misconfigurations, as occurred with the Capital One breach. I didn't get trends covered in detail, but it was due to a misconfiguration in the hybrid deployment. More generally, what can we learn? Security is an important goal, but if it's between availability or simply not being able to work, a lot of times security might get sacrificed. And so when we do that, we need to be very careful and thoughtful and figure out how we achieve security in that kind of environment. People expect security. Government agencies expect security. Consumers expect security. People are surprised when it's not there, as in the case of Zoom. There's always risks in launching products and adopting products in a rush without a full security audit. And then finally, any claims that are made by products of security are taken very seriously, especially when there's a time of need. So this is a great time to get into security. If you want job security, consider getting into information security. There are over 500,000 open cybersecurity positions in the US, and there's millions of such positions not only available worldwide, but that is expected to grow. Here's a few takeaway impacts. Let me see if I can get to a question or two.
All right. Neil, thank you so much for your presentation. It was excellent. I think maybe we have some time for one or two questions before we end the webinar. Are there any that you want to address off the top? One that I saw that I thought was particularly interesting and maybe was related to your observation about the sort of, the need to work remotely can sometimes override an employee's security concerns. Is there's a similar discussion around the need to monitor and track COVID-19 cases while also preserving, obviously, the privacy and security of those who are sharing that information, whether it's through an iPhone app or something else. do you have any thoughts on that balance? Is it a trade-off? Are there ways that we should be thinking about it?
Sure. Well, so first of all, let me say that I am just thrilled to see the level of engagement and the whole set of questions that have come over. I think Pax, what I may do is follow up with folks, follow up with you, and follow up with folks who are asking questions. I may group them together and send out some responses by email if they've provided contact information. But I'm glad that you asked that question, because I think it does thematically summarize a bunch of questions that were asked. So there's a general trade-off here between speed and agility and security. And so in the current environment, when we need to get out information about COVID-19, whether it be to healthcare workers or anybody else, I think it is a trade-off that we have to think very mindfully and carefully about. If we get information out too fast and we don't do it in a secure way, then it could be susceptible to website takeovers, Twitter account takeovers, all kinds of issues. And in fact, there's been, I won't get into any details, but there's been a lot of misinformation and disinformation that has gone out about coronavirus. Of course, disinformation gets spread with malicious intent. Misinformation is propagation of that disinformation that may be happening inadvertently. And there is the possibility for people in their lives to actually get hurt because they're acting on bad information. So I think that just having observed some of the world events and what's happened, there has been a speed with which folks have been trying to get out information. But if we don't thoughtfully do it and invest in enough security and integrity of information, I think it's could be just as likely that people could get hurt, even more so, by some of the bad information out there and some of the insecurity around information being propagated. So that's kind of my initial high-level thought on it.
That's fantastic. And thank you for your offer of maybe working through the Q&A, since we are over time. Unless there's one that you see that you really want to address, I think what we'll do is thank you all for your questions. We can put those together. And as we follow up with the recording of the webinar, we can also follow up with some sort of a blog post or something around kind of addressing a lot of these excellent questions that came in during the session. I want to thank all of you for joining us and for your patience and participation. Really had fantastic, as Neil said, fantastic questions coming in, a lot of really interesting ideas. Neil, is there anything else you would like to add?
I guess the last thing I would like to add, just looking at the questions, is a lot of folks are worried about, knowing how they can protect themselves, or if their Social Security number was stolen by the Capital One breach or whatnot. I would recommend, getting an identity protection service, because most identity protection services will keep you posted as well as notify you if you've been impacted. And I think that there's also a difference between just kind of like credit monitoring versus full identity protection. So please check out appropriate offerings. That'll also give you access to an agent that you can call and or online support. And they'd be able to do much more justice to, than I'd be able to do just trying to address the questions, at the end of this webinar.
Great. Thank you, Neil. And thank you for all your tips. And we hope everyone stays safe and during these unusual times. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your participation. And thank you again, Neil. It was a fantastic presentation and really a lot of useful information. All right, everyone. We appreciate it. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye.